everybody and welcome to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the next revolution societies are going to be on the verge of. So in particular, we'll be talking today about cryptocurrencies and how on the verge of this revolution is going to be the new way societies will be doing finances. And ultimately, the goal of it being is to move away from these corrupt financial institutions and these corrupt banks and bring the power and the financial power back into the hands of the people. So one particular cryptocurrency I'll be talking about today is a time deposit cryptocurrency called Hex, which my brother brought me into. He's been very successful in Hex. So it's just one chart I'm going to bring up and talk about. So if you want to listen more about Hex, I'll put a timestamp in the video and you can go straight to that part of the video. But really, I wanted to do a full context of cryptocurrencies. And in my previous video, when I talked about Pluto ingressing into the sign of Aquarius in 2024, it really is going to be the shift into a new way and a new world of doing things. So when people think of cryptocurrencies, maybe the first one that comes to mind are things like Bitcoin, or people may be a bit more into it, Ethereum, and a few different ones. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm very much a beginner. So forgive me if the terminologies are not correct. But really, people are starting to, see bits and bobs knocking about. So whether it's the odd advertisement, whether it's someone like, is it Matt Damon on the advertisement, on the advert, talking about cryptocurrency. So it's starting to gradually dip into the zeitgeist of the collective consciousness. But really, by most people's standards, it's really seen as a fad still. Or I've heard people quoted as monopoly money, or things along those lines where people aren't really taking it too seriously. But obviously, I've heard things like Bitcoin, but it's still like a future thing for them. People aren't really, or a lot of people, and certainly the vast majority of the population, aren't really tuned into it. And really, why cryptocurrencies are going to be so important moving forward. So in the last video, when I talked about Pluto ingressing to Aquarius and giving historical context for that, when I talked about Pluto ingressing into Capricorn in 2008, we had the financial crash. So the old way of doing things, the old system, so the financial industries, the banking industries, and really in the last 10, 13 years or so, we've really seen the corruption. And, Pluto, the themes of Pluto is bringing up the nitty gritty, its power, its control. So as we've seen Pluto go through the sign of Capricorn, we're really seeing now the unmasking of the financial industries and just the boar-faced, insidious nature of their operations. And essentially, with Pluto going into Aquarius in 2024 and the rise of cryptocurrencies and the decentralizations of the way you do finance, essentially becoming your own banker, this is going to be hopefully the end, or at least the beginnings of bringing those institutions down. And there are definitely historical precedents for this as you look through. So the first chart I want to bring up today, just to look at historical context of things like cryptocurrencies. So through human, history, there's a great guy who talked about this particular subject, and I'm just going to repeat basically what he talked about. So when you think about the history of money, you're thinking about gold as a backup. You're thinking about precious metals being minted into coins, and then eventually we got to paper money. And so anytime a new revolution comes along, people are always skeptical or quite afraid. It's part of human nature. So when we went from coins to paper, and especially going from paper to plastic, when credit cards first started coming out, my grandfather owned several businesses back in the day. And he said people were they thought it was a fad, coming into a store with a piece of plastic. So I'm going to play with this piece of plastic, and people would laugh you out the store, essentially. People saying it's not real money or it's a fad, and all these different things. Now, those same people, as other people have been discussing, are calling cryptocurrencies the same thing. They're saying it's monopoly money, it's a fad, it's never going to go anywhere. But as we see the astrological indicators through the centuries of this new revolution, it's not only going to be here and stay, and that it's not a fad and it's not a scam, it's actually going to be the new way we do finance and do industry. And so I'm just going to bring up a couple of chart examples here, especially So what we do is we look at events that have happened in the past. So really what astrology is about, it's like a weather report for the future. So if someone said on Next Tuesday, there's a 90% chance of rain. You're going to want to bring an umbrella. So the good way to maybe predict what happens when Pluto goes through Aquarius in 2024 is to look at what's happened historically as Pluto has gone through Aquarius. So what has happened historically? So historically, there have been many revolutions when Pluto has ingressed into Aquarius. The first example I have here is, which I talked about in the previous video, is the French Revolution. So the French Revolution in 1789, if you see the chart here, Pluto was well underway in the sign of Aquarius. So what was the French Revolution about? Essentially, again, as I talked about in previous videos, it was the hierarchy or the structure of Capricorn, the aristocracy, the kings and the queens, and you had the peasants starving at the bottom, that real sense of inequality, or that real sense of that power being controlled by the hands of the few. So the French Revolution really was about that revolt and the people rising up, and ended up being the king, the queen and his wife ended up being on the guillotine and off with your head. That was essentially part of the French Revolution. But really, the theory behind it and the byword of Aquarius was for the collective, for the people, rather than the few. So we have more examples of this throughout history. We go to another chart here, which was the American Revolution. So at the end of the American Revolution in 1783, again, it started in Pluto in Capricorn, but then Pluto ingressed into Aquarius. And at the end of the revolution, Pluto had ingressed into Aquarius. So again, the bywords of Aquarius, the collective, the sense of we the people, which the United States was fundamentally founded upon. It was we the British who got our asses kicked, and they said, go back home, we're not listening to your kings and queens anymore. Go away with your stamp tax, we're going to throw all your tea away. But the essential theme behind the American Revolution was essentially getting away from the old monarchies, the old way of doing things, the old structure. It was a revolution in we the people. I mean, that was really a calling card from it. It's that we the people are going to set the laws. We the people are going to determine our own fate and our own destiny. And when I tie this in with cryptocurrencies and bring in that the power and the establishment, their control over the financial industry, bringing the power back to the hands of the people, it's the same sort of themes as Pluto goes into Aquarius in 2024. So another historical example we have here is, which was a real foundation, a real shakeup back in, let me see if pull this chart up. There we go. So back in 1543, you had Copernicus's heliocentric model of the solar system. So as we see here, again, Pluto had been actually transitioning through Aquarius for some times when the paper was published. So again, another byword, the repeated themes of Pluto going through Aquarius is just shaking up the old establishment. So whether that's financial institutions, whether that's, in this case, the church. So when Copernicus brought up his heliocentric model of the solar system, it was going away from that church's model that the Earth is the center of the universe and the Earth is the center of the solar system. And it really shook the foundations of the church because, people believed that we were the center of everything. That very megalomaniac, very egocentric way of viewing ourselves. But along came Copernicus as Pluto was transiting through Aquarius and going, well, actually the fact of the matter is, an Aquarius being intellectual, it's an air sign, it's looking for truth, not, hierarchical structure. But Copernicus turned around and said, listen, the sun is the center of our solar system, and the Earth is only just a body, one of the bodies that goes round. We are not the center. So again, the Capricorn issues, the hierarchy, the structures, the church at the time was shut to the foundation because it challenged everything they believed about how the Earth operated. So again, it's just going through those different themes of Pluto going through Aquarius. It's really shaking the foundations of old established ways of doing things. Now, this will most certainly tie into cryptocurrencies and the decentralized nature of cryptocurrencies and blockchains. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm only a beginner starting to learn these different terminologies. But it's really what I'm getting the sense of. It's taking the power away from these corrupt banks where they can just manipulate spreadsheets, they can manipulate anything. The government's printing their own money, because that's what money is essentially. It's made up. It's a collective sense of value we put on, but it's created out of thin air. So people might say cryptocurrencies is monopoly money or whatever it might be. It's no different. It's no sense of creation or value than the monetary system that we have now, which is solely corrupt and solely only benefits the few. So again, the revolution in finance is going to be, again, bringing the power back to the people. And especially as, again, Pluto ingresses into Aquarius in 2024, for the next 20 years, Pluto will be in Aquarius. So right now it's starting to filter into the collective consciousness about, cryptocurrencies. You might see an advertisement here and there and different places and stuff. But for the people who are getting in early and really understand what's going behind it, actually, I was speaking to my brother and I said, I wish I was paying attention a few years ago. But at least, it's early enough now where it's still only getting into the collective consciousness. So the next revolution. So the particular cryptocurrency I want to talk about here, which I believe is a time deposit cryptocurrency, for those of you out there, you might be able to correct me. Again, I'm still learning the lingo. But what we have here, and what I really appealed to me about this particular one, is one called Hex. Now, this is the one that my brother, who I have to thank for getting me involved in cryptocurrencies, he has been in it for a few years. Hex is something that he truly believes in, and that you're starting to see his success with Hex and a few others. But he is really the one who's brought me into the fold and talked about the revolutionary ideas of Hex. And the more I understand about it and listen to the founder, Richard Hart, I know there's a community out there. Like I say, I'm new. So I'm still getting to learn everything, but it's the concept of it which I'm really interested in hearing about. Again, this is my brother's tag here. It's at WhackP on Twitter. That's his handle, so that's him I have to thank. So so talking about Hex, and I'll bring up another chart here as well. So this is my very basic layman understanding of Hex. So everyone's heard of Bitcoin, and it's the first out the gate in cryptocurrencies. So everyone's heard about it. It's the one that's advertised and things like that. But from my basic understanding, I believe it has issues. So it has issues, environmental issues with, I believe it's called mining, where there's burning fossil fuels and just different ways. It's not overly efficient. So what I've heard about with things like Hex, Pulse Chain, I think there's going to be another one called Pulse Swap, which again I need to learn all about. But basically, creating a new, more efficient ecosystem and building on the success of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. But again, I don't know the ins and outs, but it sounds like it's a better way of doing things. So not just the monetary value, because obviously everyone who goes into crypto would like to make money. No one's going to deny that, and I wouldn't do that too. But what I liked about it as well, and especially listening to the founder and a few other people talking about it, is the moral aspect of wealth. So it's talking about the decentralization and bringing the power back to the individual user, that the average Joe can get involved. It's not just for the elites. And another concept where is you get punished for being a dickhead, essentially, or being dishonest. And that's something that really appealed to me by having a sense, it seems like a sense of community where people gain if there's bad actors out there. So that's another thing that really appealed to me. But again, I'm still new to it. I'm still learning. But what's intrigued me about it is obviously my expertise as a professional astrologer is astrology. So I wanted to look at the charts of Hex and the inception of where it began. So if you can see on the chart here, so this is Hex, this is the inception chart. Now, I don't have a specific time. I do believe it, for any people who know more about Hex out there, that it was launched or established on December 2nd, 2019. So I have a time here of 12 o'clock. So if anyone has a time out there that's more accurate, I'll have more of an understanding. But even within a day or two, some of the planetary aspects are quite prominent. So the very interesting thing about Hex, and as soon as I, learned about its launch date and its inception time and created a chart for it, and this is the chart we have here. It just blew me away, because in my previous videos, like I said, I've never been into cryptocurrency only recently. But in my previous videos, I've talked about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and in the sign of Capricorn, and Capricorn being related to governments and financial institutions, and essentially the breakdown of those institutions over the next few years. And what's mind-blowing about this inception of hex chart is, and I'll try and explain this in layman terms as well as astrological terms, but if you see the mouse here, in the inception chart of hex, is you have the applying Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. So for me, for astrologers even, the Saturn and Pluto conjunction in the sign of Capricorn has been one of the biggest events in probably hundreds of years, essentially. And we've seen the effects of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2020, with the pandemic, society breaking down, absolute chaos, the biggest drop since the Great Depression, all those kind of things. So when the two powerhouses of astrology come together, and you see this historically as well, two huge conjunctions, things start to break down. So what's amazing about the hex chart and the inception of the hex chart is having these two signatures right here. So if you had a symbol for a cryptocurrency or whatever it's called, if you had a signature for it to be revolutionary or to change the future, to have this signature here of Saturn and Pluto is just, it couldn't be a more perfect example of an inception chart for something that could well possibly change the future and change the world, which is mind-blowing, revolutionary again. So another thing interesting about this chart, and like I say, I don't have a complete correct time, so I probably shouldn't talk about the angles, but I will anyway, just to see if it's close to it. But the thing about this chart and the inception of hex is it's incredibly strong. The chart is incredibly strong. You have 3 planets in rulership. So if you see up here, we have Mars in Scorpio, which is domicile. It's in rulership in the 9th house. We have one of the biggest ones you can have is Jupiter in the last minute of Sagittarius. Now, Jupiter, like a lot of the planets, have 2 ruling signs. So Jupiter, Sagittarius, and Pisces. So for this chart to have Jupiter in Sagittarius at the late degrees, and like I say, it would help to know a time because I can see at what minute this would be. But, Jupiter in Sagittarius, it's connected to abundance and wealth. It's strong. It's domicile. Even better than that, it's in an angular 10th house. So the 10th house, we're talking about reputation. In your own charts, it's usually about career, different things. But in this inception chart about hex, we're talking about the reputation of hex over time. So Jupiter and the sun being involved in the 10th house, angular, strong, domicile. As this is a diurnal chart is a day chart. So Jupiter, again, becomes even stronger, being the sect benefit. That's just an ancient technique that some astrologers use, but it makes Jupiter incredibly powerful and incredibly strong in this chart. Again, I talked about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Saturn is at home in Capricorn. So again, we've got 3 strong planets in this chart, all in domicile, all in rulership. And it bodes well for the future of hex itself. I could probably do other charts on pulse chain if I get like an inception date, pulse swap, which may be called something else. I could do one for that too. But hex in itself just shows, astrologically speaking, how strong this project either is or will become. And for a lot of people, it has become a huge project, but will only grow stronger in the future. Again, that Jupiter being strong, it's the ruler of the ascendant, even more powerful. So what's interesting about this, and if the angles are correct, and I can always go back and adjust these, but this is the chart I'm working with now. So when I talked about Mars up here in domicile and rulership in the 9th house, it rules the 2nd house. So the 2nd house in any inception chart, or if we're looking at any organizations, is the house of finance, the house of value. You can also look at the condition of Venus. And again, we talked about Jupiter. But as we talk about houses, it's really the 2nd house that we look for, wealth or any financial indications. Now, the interesting thing about this chart is Mars, domicile strong in rulership, is the ruler of the 2nd house. And what's interesting is it's also in the 9th house. So the 9th house, Mars ruling the 2nd house in the 9th house. ninth house themes, we're talking about going abroad, long distances. So this is something that's not going to be local or close by. This is going to be eventually, and I don't know if it already is, people out there might be able to tell me, but it's going to be a worldwide reach in the ninth house. Interesting, we have Mercury in the ninth house as well. It's Mars is ruling Mercury in the position there in the ninth house. So Mercury, we can also look at commerce, communication. It seems like this is going to have a powerful effect on people. And in the sign of Scorpio in the ninth house, it's a fixed sign. But we can also talk about maybe cult-like behavior. I don't want to use the word cult, but definitely a serious following, which I think I've already seen images of, and being very fond of the founder or the developers, who I don't know who they are. I only know one person within that, but it has a strong indication here of a great following. It also, you've got Mercury square Moon, and that's an applying Mercury square to the Moon within 2 degrees. So it feels like to me this could be a following, but there's going to be, again, in Scorpio ruled by Mars, a lot of people are going to defend this project. It seems like if there's any in the outside community who are suspicious of it, or maybe have called it a scam, all these different things, you're going to get real defenders of this particular project in Hex, where the people involved in this are going to go, back off, this is real, this is, and I've seen it firsthand when my brother has been involved, and he's made, he's continuing his success with Hex, and he's bringing me into the fold as well. I've still got a lot to learn, but the sense I'm getting from the community in this Deception chart is going to have a very strong, loyal base. And when you talk about Scorpio and a fixed sign and a water sign, those waters, what's the expression? Still waters run deep. And I feel like the people involved with Hex, it's going to be about passion as well as anything else. But anyway, the overall theme of this chart is very, very strong. Again, if I get a particular time, I'll be able to tweak this a little bit, and maybe a couple of things will change. But really looking at the Hex chart, it's a highly, highly strong chart. And again, with Mars domicile ruling the second house, this looks to be a project that will only gain in strength. Well, again, astrology is just about astrological weather. Like you might predict the weather a week from now. It's just strong indications that it'll be a success. It's not always a definite. I mean, like anything in life. Okay, so carry on with this Hex chart. What's interesting as well, and I'm going to bring up the transits around it, and as I click in here, hello, what are we doing? Okay. So what we do in astrology as well is we talk about movement, and I'm just going to bring up this chart here. Okay, so let's compare the Hex inception chart and the natal chart to the transits. So transits, for anyone who don't know out there, that's the real-time movements of the planets. So when we're looking at astrology, it's like I say, I'm not a financial astrologer, but I understand that when you're talking about charts and dips and ups and downs, everything in the world is on a cycle. The Earth is on a cycle around the sun. So when we're talking about planetary transits, there's always going to be ups and downs. And it's quite funny, in the astrological community, they say millionaires don't use astrologers, billionaires do. Many have in the stock markets over the years and different things like that. But I am not, that's not my speciality. I help people in their own lives with their natal charts. Like I said, if you want to look at more financial astrologers, but I'm just going to put my input here, which I think is relevant to this conversation. Okay, so with the Hex chart we've got here is the Hex chart in the middle. And I've taken these transits back out to, hold on, I've gone a bit forward there. So let's take these back. So the inception was December 2nd of 2019, but I'm going to go back to about, March 7th of 2021. So what's interesting with this, and that's why I feel like this chart is quite accurate. Again, the timing will make a difference. Okay, so when we look at the charts here, we said Mars domicile and ruling the second house. Any transits of Mars, excuse me, any transits of Mars are going to be important in the inception chart of Hex. And so we're going to be looking at transits through there. We're going to be looking at, Jupiter, it's the ruler of the ascendant as well. But if we're looking at value and assets, we're going to be looking at the transits of Venus, and particularly anything that touches on Mars, because it's the ruler of the second house. So what's interesting here is these are the transits going around the outside. So we have, if you just take a look at the degrees here, so Mars in the inception chart and the natal chart is at 8 degrees Scorpio in a fixed sign. Okay, so we've had transits in Saturn going through Aquarius at 9 degrees, and this was around March time. So for those who may not know too much about astrology, when we're talking about Mars and when we're talking about Saturn, you can think of Mars being the foot on the gas in the car, and Saturn being the foot on the brake. So when there's any interaction or aspects between Mars and Saturn, it's usually a sense of having your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time. So things don't always move forward. So what I found interesting about the Hex, make sure I've got the right one here. Yeah, the Hex price chart. And again, I'm not an expert here. I'm just trying to look at things together. Is let's look around March of 2021. And I'm sure it's already picked up from there. But this here in the transit chart is March 7th of 2021. So this, what we call here, is a square aspect between transiting Saturn and Mars. So again, talking about the foot on the gas and the brake, things aren't moving too fast in the Hex chart at this particular point. So what you really want to see is Saturn at 9 degrees, as Saturn moves away from that square aspect and the appliance square aspect, you see it starts to lift off the chart. And what's interesting in this chart, if I go a few months ahead, okay, you see Saturn there moving around at 11, it's moving ahead. May, it's getting further away. So as the brakes have moved away from the gas pedal, it's really Mars is in charge and moving it forward. So we see here from Hex from March, particularly when we get to around May time, and we've got May in the transit wheel there, and you see Saturn moving away from that hard square aspect, taking the foot off the brakes essentially. And then with Hex, you see this explosion right here. I don't know if that's a technical term. That's what I'm going to say. Explosion going up. So as we see from May onwards, you start seeing this, ups and downs, but the trajectory as you pull out, even with the ups and downs, is to the right and up. So that's where you see the pedal, the brake pedal being taken off, and you see this starting to rise up till about what's the peak here? I don't know if this chart is correct. If any knowledgeable people out there can tell me more. So it looks around September time was around the peak. So let's go back to the astrological chart and let's go through. Now, what was the problem with Saturn around as you got further on? It was still enough, even in June, to be enough away from those 8 degrees, but Saturn stationed to go retrograde. So as we move these months forward, let's go back. Can you see how Saturn is now starting to move? It looks like it's going backwards. It's the retrograde phase. Obviously, planets don't go retrograde. It's our perception. But we see Saturn moving back towards the 8 degrees of Mars as we go through. So August, September, it's hit past the 8 degrees. And usually when it goes direct is when you start getting the effect. So let's get to the end of September, early October, move forward again. Then we've got Saturn and Saturn, that station to go direct at this time. But can you see how the degrees, the 7, the square, the 7 and the 8 in a hard square aspect is back again? Okay, so that was November 7th. Where were we? Was it starting to go down at that point? Let's see. Yeah, could well be. I'm trying to look for the date there. 10, okay, 11, 7, around that time. So, going down, but, ups and downs at that particular time. So my theory is, astrologically speaking, as how we saw that Saturn before, when Saturn was taken off the brakes around this point, and again, not a dead-on date, just a general correlation between it. When the brakes were taken off around that time, and we move it forward, and Saturn was moving away, there was starting to be these higher, rushes, higher, what's the technical term? I don't know, getting bigger across the chart. And then as we saw Saturn moving back, towards those degrees in the retrograde phase, then maybe seeing that dip. Now, I'm not saying that's cause and effect. I just think it's an interesting correlation, and Mars being an important planet in Hex's inception, that would be something I would watch out for future forecasts. But I mean, I wouldn't, because I don't have a particular, maybe I don't know if the right time, I wouldn't do anything further ahead than the next few months, because like I say, this could be not the right chart, but it's interesting. The correlations are quite similar. Okay, so what did I get to then? September, October, November. So we're in December right now. So as you can see here, that 9 to 8 degrees. So again, this middle chart here is the Hex natal chart, essentially 8 degrees, 9 degrees. Now what we start seeing in these next couple of months, watch this symbol here, Saturn, 12 degrees. This will start moving away, as it did when it started to climb. So say, for example, we get to February 7th of 2022. We've got Saturn that has moved away from that hard square aspect, and it's not going to be back there for a while. It's not going to retrograde back and forth on that particular degree. So what's interesting about this, around this time in February of 2022, is you've got Saturn moving away from that hard aspect. And again, Mars ruling the second house, or we think ruling the second house based on this chart. What's interesting as well is Jupiter being so strong in the natal inception chart, is we have Jupiter going into its other home sign, strong sign of Pisces. So again, Jupiter has two rulers. It's Sagittarius and Pisces. They're the domicile rulers. They're the ones that you want it to be in. It could be in 10 other signs, but if you've got Jupiter in Sagittarius at home and Pisces, you're in a good position, depending on what's going on with your chart. So again, it goes into an angular house, just like the angular natal Jupiter in Sagittarius. What's interesting here around February of this time is, again, 8 degrees around February 7th. The difference here between the hard fixed square between Scorpio and Aquarius, but, very fixed signs. If you know any Aquarians or Scorpios or Leos, then, their fixed nature, they can be quite stubborn. I'm an Aquarian, we can be quite stubborn people. But when we go into a more mutable sign, we would go into Pisces here, you can see the blue here. So these are both water signs. So 8 degrees of Mars, 8 degrees of Pisces with Jupiter. And this is what we call a trine. So this is forming a nice trine to Mars, and it's giving support. So again, Mars ruling the second house. It could be an indication of increased value. But again, that's just speculation. That's just working with the transits. If I had more information about the times, I'd look at, transits, progressions, solar return charts, because Hex has just had its birthday. What is it? December 2nd. So it's just had its birthday. I could even do a solar return chart and look even deeper. But just using the transits is quite interesting to see the correlation between that Saturn, again, taking the foot off the brake, and it started to rise. And then as Saturn started making its nuisance way back, pulling that hold on it. But again, when we get into next year, February, Saturn moving away, we've got the nice Jupiter trine. The signature in the Hex's chart is the Uranus-Mars opposition, which is quite interesting. So when we see Uranus moving forward and retrograding back and forth, that's going to have an effect on the chart. And again, it's not a full chart analysis of Hex. It's just I'm picking up bits and pieces of what I find quite interesting. It'll take hours of putting things together to get a real dial down into what's going. So that's my analysis. And the more I'm learning about Hex, the more excited I am in learning about it. Again, my brother brought me on board. I'm starting to learn more about videos. Again, I'm a cryptocurrency newbie. I'm sure the more I learn, the more I'll pick up terminologies and stuff. So I don't know if there's a technical term for a newbie, but that's what I'll call myself right now. But again, that's something that when my brother was talking about the philosophy behind Hex. So whether that's helping the average Joes out there, obviously people can make a fortune. Also the moralistic side, the environmental side, all these things that are tying into Pluto going into Aquarius, where it becomes more revolutionary, it becomes more egalitarian. The French Revolution, bring it back to the people. The American Revolution, it was about we the people. Copernicus's model, shaking up the establishment. And now as Pluto goes into Aquarius in 2024, it's going to be part of the zeitgeist. Cryptocurrencies as a whole, not just talking about Hex, cryptocurrencies as a whole, It's going to be that it's the new revolution and the way we do things. And again, having that decentralized nature of doing things. And it sounds like Hex in particular is really taking the faults of things like Bitcoin. Again, I don't know the details, but it sounds like it's improving upon the systems. I heard someone talk about, when the equivalent of MySpace when it came out. Everyone was on MySpace. It was the biggest thing. It was like no one is ever going to get off MySpace. And they had the newest, bigger thing, which was Facebook. You had AOL at the beginning of email and stuff like that. And then you had things like Google jump through. But you always have these naysayers. So there was a famous quote of one guy talking about the internet being a fad. The internet will collapse, things like that. Back in, what was it? What year was it? Like 94? Don't quote me on that. But you get the same people now talking about cryptocurrencies in the same vein, talking about scams, talking about, monopoly money, all those kind of things. And you can watch this video back in 10, 15 years time, and that will absolutely not be the case. It's not a matter of, it's already here. It's already revolutionizing things. It's already here. But it's going to get more into the collective consciousness, and it's going to be, again, I don't know a time frame on it. I'd have to look at charts, 10, 15 years or so. It's going to be as normal using cryptocurrencies as it is now. We go into a store and we swipe our card. It's going to be as normal as that. So for the ones who are in early, I think this guy I've been listening to, is it Richard Hart? I'll pull him up. The thing I really like about this guy is, he's raised charity for, was it the Sens? So raising money for charity. I've seen different talks about him. I like eccentric characters. I would actually like to look at his natal chart properly. I do have a date here of October 9th, 1979. I have looked at that chart, but without, a proper time, it would be, I wouldn't want to talk about someone's natal chart without a proper time. It would only be, speculation. But the more I listen to this guy, Richard Hart, and his, brilliant intellect, and just the way, I think he has Mercury in Scorpio, like the chart of Hex. So Mercury in Scorpio ruled by Mars. If someone challenges these people, they're not afraid to kick off and say, what, mate, let's bring it on. And not only that, use his intellect and his intelligence to just beat people away. So whether people are calling it scams or all that kind of stuff, he's just literally bang, knocking it out of the park. And what I like about this guy, and again, you can't make presumptions on people you've never met, but the sense I'm getting from this guy and looking at some of the astrology and stuff like that is that this guy seems wealthy enough already. So I always look at the motivations behind people. So what would the motivation of this guy be? I don't believe it's money, because if you've already got it and amassed such a wealth, like, why would you bother doing a scam and trying to screw people over when you've already got masses of wealth anyway? Look at the people who get into Wall Street and stuff like that. If you're a borderline sociopath, like, they want you to be a CEO and things like that. But I feel when he's talking about it, I feel this is different. I feel like this has a more moral angle. Of course, it's about getting rich, I guess, for people in the community, but the moral angle as well. Like, again, talking about Pluto go through Capricorn, destroying those corrupt institutions who have screwed over the populations for years. You have these corrupt banks. They come up with these terminologies. They make it so complicated, people can't understand it, and they just screw you over. The banks do. They can manipulate the government. They're all. My background is politics, and if you see a lot of my older videos, I'm talking about politics. But I've got to the point now where it's not about Republican, Democrat, left or right, and stuff like that. We're all getting screwed by the same people. So that's why I think things like this is going to be a good way of going forward. Decentralization, making you the banker, because once you take the financial power away from these institutions and these corporations, and then you bring it back to the people. So I like what this guy is doing. I like what he's saying, and putting things together. But again, when you're talking about motivations, I don't think it's a purely monetary thing. I think I've met a couple of wealthy people, and I think it gets to a point where they have so much financial wealth and materialism that what they look at next is what's my legacy going to be? We don't live here forever. So they're always thinking, what's my legacy going to be? How can I make impact on the thing? Do I want my name in record books? I think for a lot of wealthy people, that becomes the goal rather than just hoarding amounts of wealth. But again, I could be wrong. I don't know the person in person, and again, I don't have this natal chart in front of me, but that's the impression I get. And again, so, what would my motivation doing these videos? My motivation really essentially is looking for a better world. If I can leave my son and my children a better world, then I'm for anything that moves towards those goals. And that's where I stand in all manners of life. So, okay, so thank you for the video. It wasn't scripted, so I'm sorry if I rambled on and went from here, there, and everywhere. But essentially, you can watch this video in 10, 15 years. Cryptocurrencies are here to stay. It's going to be revolutionary, and it's the new way we're going to be doing finance. And I've got zero doubts, I think, at this point. But you can prove me wrong if you come back in a few years and let me know. So thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. Again, you guys know the deal. And thank you for listening in, and have a wonderful day. Cheers. Bye-bye.